Imagine walking home after a long day, just want to see your family, when suddenly, two men in fake police uniforms step out of shadows. They shove you, insult you, and beat you in your own neighborhood, all because of the color of your skin. That's exactly what happened to Marcus Johnson, a Navy SEAL veteran. But what those men didn't know was that Marcus wasn't alone. His brothers, his SEAL team, were about to show up, and what happened next shocked the entire community. If you love powerful stories of justice, courage, and real-life heroes, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our family. Here, every story will inspire you, move you, and keep you watching until the very end. Stop right there, boy. Those words shattered the quiet night like a gunshot. Marcus Johnson froze in his tracks, the weight of the insult sinking into his chest. He had heard those words before in his life, but never had they sounded so threatening, so poisonous. He wasn't doing anything wrong, just walking home after a long shift at work. He had a grocery bag in his hand, a weary look on his face, and thoughts of hugging his daughter goodnight. But tonight, that simple walk turned into a nightmare. Two men stepped out from the shadows, their boots pounding against the pavement. They were dressed like police officers, dark uniforms, shiny badges, and heavy belts loaded with gear. To anyone passing by, they looked official. Their tone, their posture, even the way they carried themselves screamed authority. But something about them felt off, and Marcus knew it instantly. One of the men moved in front of him, blocking his path. "Where you going?" he demanded. Marcus raised his bag. "Home. I live right down the street." His voice was calm, respectful, the way every black father teaches his son to speak when questioned by someone in authority. But respect didn't matter tonight. The second man smirked. "You don't belong here." Marcus's heart sank. He had heard those words before, too, whispered by neighbors, muttered under breaths, painted in the way people looked at him when he jogged in his own neighborhood. But now those words weren't whispers. They were weapons. Before Marcus could explain again, the first man shoved him hard in the chest. The bag flew from his hand, oranges rolling across the concrete. Marcus stumbled back, but kept his balance. "Sir, I live here. I can show you my ID," he said, reaching for his wallet. But the men weren't interested in ID. The shove turned into fists. One of them swung without warning, knuckles slamming into Marcus's jaw. Pain exploded in his face as he stumbled again, this time crashing onto the sidewalk. The other man joined in, boots thudding against his ribs, arms, and back. "Stay down," one of them barked. Marcus groaned, coughing, trying to cover his head. He wasn't a stranger to pain. He had been through Navy SEAL training, had faced enemies in combat overseas. But this was different. These weren't trained soldiers or even real officers. These were cowards, men hiding behind fake uniforms, men who thought a badge bought online gave them the right to dehumanize someone because of the color of his skin. Inside nearby houses, lights flicked on. Curtains shifted. Neighbors peered out, their faces pale with shock. Phones lifted, recording shaky videos from behind the safety of glass. No one dared come outside. Everyone had the same thought. What if they come after me next? The men kicked Marcus again, this time in the stomach. He gasped for air, clutching his side. His body screamed with pain, but his pride hurt even more. He had risked his life for his country. He had fought in deserts and jungles, so people at home could feel safe. And here he was, on the ground in his own neighborhood, treated like a criminal by men who weren't even real police. One of the men leaned down, pressing his fake badge against Marcus's bloody cheek. "Remember this face, boy. We run this neighborhood, not you." And just like that, they walked away, laughing, mocking, leaving Marcus broken on the concrete. The street was quiet again, except for Marcus's ragged breathing. Slowly, painfully, he rolled onto his back, staring up at the night sky. The stars blurred as tears filled his eyes, not just from the pain, but from humiliation, the betrayal, the fury boiling inside him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. With trembling hands, he pulled it out. It was his daughter calling. He couldn't let her hear him like this. He couldn't let her know what had just happened. He answered, forcing strength into his voice. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" her sweet voice asked. Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat. Soon, baby girl. Daddy's on his way. When he finally made it to the hospital, his body bruised and battered, the truth came out. The men weren't police at all. They were part of a so-called neighborhood enforcement unit backed by the HOA. Ordinary men playing dress-up, pretending to be law enforcers. They had no authority, no legal right to stop him, and certainly no right to beat him. The doctors treated his wounds, but there was no medicine for what had been taken from him that night. His dignity, his peace of mind, his sense of safety, all shattered. Marcus stared at his reflection in the hospital mirror. Swollen lip, black eye, blood still crusted near his nose. He didn't just see a man who had been beaten. He saw a father who had been humiliated in front of his community. He saw a veteran who had given everything for his country, only to be treated like a stranger in his own home. And as he sat there, fists clenched, one thought burned hotter than all the pain in his body. This isn't over. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of the heart monitor and the soft of the machines. Marcus Johnson lay in bed, his ribs wrapped in bandages, his lips swollen, his face bruised. He looked like a man who had just walked off the battlefield. But the truth was far worse. This battle had been fought right at home, on the very streets where his daughter rode her bike and where he should have felt safest. At first, Marcus thought it was over. The men had been exposed as frauds, and surely the truth would be enough. But the next morning, the neighborhood HOA released a statement. And when Marcus's wife read it out loud, he could hardly believe the words. The HOA deeply regrets the incident involving Mr. Johnson. Our patrol officers reported suspicious behavior, and their actions were taken in the interest of neighborhood safety. We will fully investigate this matter. Suspicious behavior? That was their excuse? Marcus had been carrying groceries, walking to his own house, minding his own business. Yet somehow they twisted it into his fault. His wife slammed the paper down, her hands trembling. "They're protecting them," she said bitterly. "They're trying to make you the problem, Marcus." And she was right. The HOA board wasn't condemning the attackers. They were defending them. To them, Marcus wasn't a veteran, a father, or a neighbor. He was just someone they thought didn't belong. But what the HOA didn't count on was the power of modern technology. Because while they spun their lies, the truth was already spreading. Several neighbors had recorded the entire attack from their windows. The video showed Marcus calmly explaining himself, only to be shoved, punched, and kicked by the so-called officers. There was no resisting, no threats, nothing suspicious about him at all. He was simply beaten because they wanted to beat him. One of the neighbors uploaded the video online. Within hours, it went viral. The caption read, "Fake cops in our neighborhood beat a man for walking home. This is not okay." The footage struck a nerve. Thousands of comments poured in. People were outraged, furious, heartbroken. Many pointed out the obvious, that Marcus had served his country as a Navy SEAL, put his life on the line, only to be treated worse than a criminal in his own community. Others saw themselves in him. Fathers, brothers, sons who had been stopped, questioned, and harassed just for existing. Reporters soon showed up outside the hospital. They wanted interviews, headlines, sound bites. But Marcus wasn't interested in fame. He did want his pain to become a spectacle. What he wanted, what he needed, was justice. Meanwhile, his daughter sat quietly by his hospital bed, her small hand clutching his larger, bandaged one. She looked up at him with wide, tearful eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "why did they hurt you?" Marcus's throat tightened. How could he explain hatred to a child? How could he tell her that some people saw the color of his skin and decided that was all they needed to know? He forced a smile, brushing her cheek gently. "They were wrong, baby girl," he said softly. "But Daddy's going to make sure it doesn't happen again." That promise burned in his chest. And Marcus knew he couldn't keep it alone. When news of the attack reached his old Navy SEAL teammates, the calls started coming in. First one, then another, then another. Men he hadn't seen in years, brothers who had fought beside him in some of the harshest places on earth, now calling with one simple question. "Brother, what do you need?" Marcus tried to downplay it. "I'm okay," he said. "I'll handle it." But they weren't convinced. SEALs had a code, leave no man behind. And to them, Marcus was family. One of them, Jake, Said it plain and simple. You didn't leave us behind overseas. We're not leaving you behind now. Within days, 5 of his old teammates booked flights and drove into town. They weren't coming to cause chaos or play vigilante. They were coming to stand beside their brother to show him and everyone else that he wasn't alone. Marcus's wife was stunned when she saw them step into the hospital room, broad-shouldered, disciplined, moving with quiet authority. They weren't just visitors. They were a wall of strength. "Good to see you, brother," one of them said, gripping Marcus's hand firmly. For the first time since the attack, Marcus felt his spirit lift. The bruises still hurt, the wounds still ached, but something inside him shifted. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was theirs too. The SEALs didn't waste time. They immediately began gathering information. They talked to neighbors, collected videos, and pieced together timelines. One of them had contacts in cybersecurity and managed to dig into HOA emails. What they discovered was shocking. The HOA board had known the men weren't real cops. They had paid them to patrol the neighborhood anyway, hoping their intimidating presence would keep certain people out, or keep certain people in their place. It wasn't just negligence. It was a cover-up. The SEALs sat down with Marcus late one night, spreading the evidence across the hospital table. "They think they can bury this," one of them said, tapping the documents. "But we're not going to let them." Marcus nodded. His body might have been bruised, but his resolve was stronger than ever. "They wanted me to feel small," he said quietly. But they forgot one thing. The others looked at him. "I'm not alone." And with his brothers at his side, Marcus knew the fight for truth had only just begun. The hospital walls smelled faintly of antiseptic. But inside Marcus's room, the air had shifted. It wasn't just a recovery room anymore. It had become a war room. Around Marcus sat 5 men who weren't just friends, but brothers forged in a fire of combat. These were men who had shared foxholes, storms, and sleepless nights under enemy fire. Each of them carried scars, some visible, some invisible, but all of them carried loyalty. Jake, tall and broad with grizzled beard, leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. He had been Marcus's team leader years ago in Afghanistan. Beside him sat Torres, sharp-eyed and quiet, the team's reconnaissance expert who missed nothing. On the other side was Doc, the team medic who still carried a first aid kit everywhere out of habit. Next came Williams, wiry and restless, the explosives expert who always carried a mischievous grin. And finally, Sam, stoic, calm, and steady, the kind of man whose silence carried more weight than most people's speeches. Marcus looked around the room, his bruised face half hidden by bandages, and for the first time since the attack, he felt whole again. These weren't just men. They were a reminder of who he was. Not a victim, not a target, a warrior. "I appreciate you coming," Marcus said, his voice low but steady. "But this isn't a battlefield. This is—" Jake cut him off. "It is a battlefield, brother. Different terrain. Same fight. Somebody thinks they can break you. And if they think they can do that, they don't know who they're messing with." The men nodded. They didn't need long speeches. Their presence alone was enough. The first thing they did was lay down rules. They weren't here to start chaos or get revenge. They were here to expose the truth and protect Marcus. "We're not vigilantes," Sam reminded the group. "We do this clean. We do it smart. We gather evidence. We turn it over. And we make sure no one can bury it." Torres tapped a notepad. Already started digging. The HOA board's emails are sloppy. They knew those guys weren't police. They hired them anyway. There's a money trail. William smirked. "Amateurs. They play dress up with fake badges. But they've never faced real operators. This'll be over quick." But Marcus shook his head. "It's not about quick. It's about right. If we go in guns blazing, the story turns into us being the bad guys. We need to show the world who they really are." The SEALs nodded again. They weren't just muscle. They were disciplined men who understood strategy better than anyone. So they set to work. The next few days felt like a covert operation. Torres mapped out the neighborhood like it was hostile terrain. He noted the patrol routes of the fake cops, the blind spots of the security cameras, and locations of every entrance and exit to the HOA clubhouse. Williams joked about planting smoke grenades, but the others ignored him. They weren't here for theatrics. Doc spent time talking to neighbors who had recorded the attack. His calm, reassuring presence encouraged them to share what they'd seen. Some were hesitant, afraid of retaliation from the HOA, but when they realized who Marcus's friends were, former Navy SEALs, they felt safer. One elderly woman even pressed her phone into Doc's hand, whispering, "I didn't know what to do, but maybe you'll know how to use this." On was another angle of the attack, one even clearer than the viral video. Meanwhile, Jake and Sam handled the digital side. They hacked into HOA servers, carefully pulling emails, meeting notes, and payment records. What they found painted a disturbing picture. The HOA board had deliberately created this neighborhood enforcement team to intimidate residents they didn't like. Minorities, renters, even young families who didn't fit the image the board wanted. All of them had been targeted. Marcus was just the latest victim, but not the first. They've been running this for months, Jake said, scrolling through the files. Harassment, fines, threats. They even falsified police reports. Sam's jaw tightened. This isn't just corruption. This is organized intimidation. One evening, the fake cops strutted through the neighborhood again. They wore their fake uniforms proudly, laughing and slapping each other on the back like they were kings. What they didn't realize was that every step they took was being watched. From a parked car down the street, Torres filmed their movements with a high-powered lens. From a rooftop, Williams observed with binoculars. Sam and Jake monitored from laptops, hacking into their walkie-talkie frequencies to hear their conversations. And Marcus, still healing but determined, sat in the shadows listening. "They're not scared," Marcus muttered. "They think they own this place." Jake put a hand on his shoulder. "Then let's show them they don't." The operation came to a head a week later. The SEALs knew the fake cops were meeting at the HOA clubhouse that night, reporting back to board like soldiers reporting to commanders. It was the perfect chance. The SEALs moved with precision. They didn't storm in. No, that wasn't their style. They waited until men were comfortable, laughing about their patrols, bragging about how they'd put that guy in his place. Their words were dripping with arrogance, ignorance, cruelty. Then the room went quiet. The door shut behind them with a heavy click. Marcus stepped in first, his bruises still visible but his eyes blazing. Behind him, his team fanned out, silent and imposing. They didn't need weapons. Their very presence was enough. The fake cops froze. One tried to bluster, "You can't be in here," but his voice cracked when he saw the steely calm in Jake's eyes. "You think you're tough beating on an unarmed man?" Torres said coldly. Williams leaned against the wall, smirking. "What's the matter? No grocery bags to knock out of someone's hand tonight." The room felt smaller, suffocating. The fake cops weren't laughing anymore. They were cornered rats in a trap. Marcus stepped closer, his voice steady, but filled with fire. "You thought you could break me. But you forgot something. I don't stand alone. I've got brothers who don't scare easy. Men who face worse than you could ever imagine. And tonight, you're not dealing with a man you thought you could bully. You're dealing with all of us." The men stammered, trying to explain, but their excuses fell apart under the weight of the evidence the SEALs had gathered. Jake placed a recorder on the table and pressed play. Emails, audio clips, and video footage filled the room, exposing every lie. By the time the real police arrived, called in by Sam with the evidence already compiled, the fake cops were shaking. Their forged badges were confiscated. Their arrests were swift. And when the HOA board tried to intervene, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, Jake handed the officers a file thick with proof of their corruption. "This isn't a misunderstanding," Jake said firmly. "This is a crime." That night, as Marcus watched the men who had humiliated him being led away in handcuffs, he didn't feel like a victim anymore. He felt like a soldier again, standing tall with his brothers by his side. The fight wasn't over. There would be trials, hearings, more battles ahead. But the tide had turned. The HOA's power had cracked. The fake cops had fallen, and the truth was finally on his side. And it was all because of one thing: Brotherhood. The flashing red and blue lights painted the neighborhood in streaks of color. For the first time in months, those lights didn't spark fear. They sparked relief. The fake cops, once so smug and untouchable, now sat on the curb with their hands cupped behind their backs, their fake badges tossed into evidence bags. Marcus stood nearby, ribs still aching but heart steady, watching as real officers loaded the men into squad cars. His Navy SEAL brothers flanked him silently, like guardians ensuring no one laid another hand on him. Neighbors peeked out from windows and doorways, murmuring to one another. For weeks they had been afraid. Tonight, they saw courage. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The next day, the story exploded. News crews swarmed the neighborhood, microphones thrust into faces, cameras rolling nonstop. The headlines were everywhere. HOA hires fake police to patrol neighborhood. Caught beating resident. Navy SEAL veteran targeted by fraudulent cops. Community in shock as HOA corruption uncovered. The HOA board tried to spin it again. They issued statements filled with half-truths, claiming ignorance. We didn't know they weren't real officers, one board member insisted at a press conference. But the evidence spoke louder than their words. The SEALs had collected emails, payment records, and even meeting transcripts that showed the truth. The board had known all along. They had authorized the patrols, encouraged intimidation, and looked the other way when residents were harassed. For Marcus, the fight shifted from the streets to the courtroom. Prosecutors built a strong case, charging the fake cops with assault, impersonating law enforcement, and conspiracy. Several HOA board members were charged as well, their negligence and involvement too blatant to ignore. The trial drew massive attention. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters, activists, veterans, and ordinary citizens who had been moved by Marcus's story. Every day felt like a battle in itself. Cross-examinations, testimony, and endless legal jargon. But Marcus showed up day after day, never wavering. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced, intimidated, or told they didn't belong. On the witness stand, Marcus's voice was steady. He recounted the night of the attack, the words, the blows, the humiliation. The courtroom was silent, every ear tuned to his testimony. He didn't dramatize or exaggerate. He didn't need to. The truth was powerful enough. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The defense tried to claim Marcus had resisted, that the men had acted in self-defense. But when the prosecution played the uncut video, their argument collapsed. The footage showed Marcus standing calmly, holding his groceries, speaking respectfully. It showed him being shoved, beaten, and kicked while never once raising a hand in aggression. Gasps filled the courtroom. The jury's expressions hardened. Even the judge's eyes narrowed with disgust. And then, as if to seal their own fate, the fake cop's own words from the clubhouse recording were played aloud. Yeah, we showed him who runs this place. Guy thought he belonged here. Had to put him in his place. There was no defending it, no spinning it, no erasing it. Meanwhile, Marcus's SEAL brothers didn't just sit in the background. They testified too, not about the attack, but about who Marcus really was. They spoke about his service, his sacrifices, his leadership in combat. They painted a picture of a man who had given everything for his country, only to be betrayed in his own neighborhood. Marcus isn't just a veteran, Jake told the court. He's a man of honor. And what happened to him wasn't just an attack on him. It was an attack on the values he fought to protect. The courtroom buzzed with emotion. Even jurors were visibly moved. Weeks dragged into months, but finally, the verdict came. The jury filed back into the courtroom, their faces solemn. The room held its breath as the foreman stood. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of impersonating law enforcement, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, we find the defendants guilty. One by one, the fake cops were found guilty on all counts. The HOA board members didn't escape either. Several were convicted of negligence and conspiracy, facing fines and prison sentences. Marcus sat still, his hands clasped tightly, as the words washed over him. Justice. Finally, justice. His wife squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her face. His daughter, too young to understand the full weight of the trial, smiled because she could see her daddy smiling again. But the victory wasn't just in the courtroom. Outside, the community itself began to change. Residents who had once stayed silent out of fear now found their voices. They organized meetings, demanded accountability, and worked to rebuild the HOA into something transparent and fair. The atmosphere shifted from fear to unity. Neighbors who had never spoken to Marcus before now approached him with gratitude and respect. "You stood up for all of us," one man said. Another woman hugged him tightly and whispered, "You gave us back our courage." And Marcus? He didn't let the attention go to his head. He remained humble, always redirecting praise to his brothers. "I couldn't have done this alone," he told reporters. "It wasn't about me. It was about us, about what's right." Months later, Marcus stood in the very same neighborhood where he had once been beaten. But this time it was different. Families gathered in the park for a community barbecue. Kids laughed as they played. Neighbors chatted freely without fear of being harassed. The air was lighter, warmer, alive with hope. At the center of it all, Marcus stood with his wife and daughter, smiling as his brothers grilled burgers nearby. It wasn't a celebration of victory. It was a celebration of healing. During the event, the new HOA board presented Marcus with a plaque in recognition of courage, resilience, and service to this community. The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus accepted it quietly, his heart swelling, not because of the plaque, but because he knew what it represented. A neighborhood once divided by fear was now united by truth. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the barbecue smoke curled into the sky, Marcus pulled his Seal brothers aside. "You didn't have to come," he said, "but you did, and because of you, my family is safe. My community is safe. I'll never forget that." Jake clapped him on the shoulder. "That's what family does, brother. You'd have done the same for any of us." Marcus nodded. He thought back to that night on the pavement, bruised and broken, staring up at the stars. Back then, he had felt small, humiliated, powerless. But now, standing tall with his brothers at his side, he realized something important. They hadn't just restored his dignity. They had shown him, and everyone else, that justice is possible when people refuse to back down. And as the laughter of children filled the air, Marcus smiled. He knew his scars would never disappear. But he also knew something else. Scars are proof not of weakness, but of survival. And his survival had turned into something greater, a new beginning for an entire community. Because justice, once served, doesn't just punish the guilty, it heals the broken. The seasons began to change, but something deeper than the weather had shifted in Marcus Johnson's neighborhood. Where once there had been whispers of fear, now there was a hum of life returning, laughter spilling across lawns, children's bikes clattering down sidewalks, and neighbors greeting one another with smiles instead of suspicion. Marcus often walked the same street where the attack had taken place. His ribs had healed, though they ached sometimes in the cool air. His bruises had faded, leaving behind faint scars on his skin. But the scars inside, the humiliation, the rage, the betrayal, were far more lasting. Yet as he walked, holding his daughter's hand, he realized those scars had transformed into something else. They were reminders that he had survived, that he had fought back, that he had shown his daughter, his wife, and his community what resilience really looked like. The HOA, once a symbol of intimidation, had been completely restructured. Several corrupt board members were gone, replaced by a diverse group of residents determined to rebuild trust. For the first time, meetings were open to everyone, with no secrets, no hidden decisions. It was during one such meeting that Marcus was nominated to serve on the new board. He had never thought about taking on such a role before. He was a Navy SEAL, a man used to missions and operations, not homeowner politics. But the community insisted. They wanted someone they could trust, someone who had already proven that he would stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. "Marcus," one neighbor said during the vote, "you already showed us what leadership looks like. You protected us when nobody else would. You belong here." The vote was unanimous. Marcus accepted, not because he wanted the position, but because he understood the responsibility. He wasn't just representing himself. He was representing everyone who had once felt silenced. The changes came quickly. Instead of spending HOA funds on intimidation tactics, money was redirected toward community improvements, fixing playground equipment, planting trees, creating scholarships for neighborhood kids. Instead of patrols, they organized neighborhood watch groups that worked with real police officers, not frauds. Instead of exclusion, there was inclusion. Potlucks, block parties, and family events became the new normal. At the first community barbecue under the new board, Marcus stood by the grill, apron on, flipping burgers while his SEAL brothers tease him. "Man, you fought in combat zones, and now you're fighting smoke from a charcoal grill," Williams joked, coughing dramatically. Marcus laughed. "This is tougher work than Afghanistan." His daughter ran to the crowd, chasing other kids, her laughter ringing like music. His wife chatted with neighbors, her shoulders finally relaxed, her smile unforced. The image of that night, the fear, the beating, the humiliation, seemed distant now, replaced by something better, belonging. But healing wasn't just about community events or new policies. It was personal, too. Marcus knew his daughter would never forget seeing him in the hospital, broken and bandaged. He wanted her to understand that pain doesn't define you. How you rise from it does. One evening, he sat with her on the porch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and pink. "Daddy," she asked softly, "do you still hurt?" Marcus thought for a moment. "A little, but not the way I did before." She tilted her head. "Then why are you okay now?" He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Because I didn't go through it alone. Because I had family, friends, and people who cared enough to stand with me. That's what makes me strong. Not because I never got hurt, but because I never stayed down." She smiled, leaning against him. "So you're like a superhero?" Marcus chuckled. "Something like that. But real superheroes don't wear capes. They just don't give up." The SEALs eventually returned to their own lives. They never wanted recognition, never sought fame. Before leaving, Jake summed it up simply. "We didn't come here for glory. We came here because you're our brother. That's all that matters." Marcus hugged each of them tightly, promising to visit. Though they scattered across different states, their bond remained unshakable. Every time Marcus looked at his daughter laughing or his wife smiling, he silently thanked them. Without his brothers, justice might never have been served. Months later, the neighborhood was unrecognizable compared to the one that had been ruled by fear. Children played freely. Families who once considered moving away decided to stay. The HOA, once a symbol of corruption, had become a model for other communities. Local news stations reported on the transformation, calling it the neighborhood reborn. But Marcus never took the spotlight for himself. When asked how it all changed, he always gave the same answer. "It wasn't me. It was us. A community united, standing together." Still, people couldn't ignore what he had endured and overcome. Invitations poured in, churches asking him to speak, schools inviting him to talk to students about resilience and courage. At first, Marcus was hesitant. He wasn't a public speaker. But when he saw the faces of young people listening to him, he realized his story mattered. "You'll face hard times," he told a group of high school students one afternoon. "You will face people who try to tell you you're not good enough, that you don't belong. But listen to me. Don't let them decide who you are. Stand tall, stand proud, and never, ever let anyone take away your dignity." The students erupted in applause. Marcus smiled, humble, but also proud. Not proud of what had happened to him, but proud of what had come out of it. His pain had turned into purpose. As time passed, the memories of the attack became less about the beating itself and more about what followed. The resilience, the unity, the justice. His scars no longer felt like marks of shame, but badges of survival. Sometimes, late at night, Marcus would sit outside beneath the stars, the same stars he had stared at while lying on the pavement months earlier, bruised and broken. Back then, those stars had felt cold and distant. Now, they felt warm, almost protective. He thought about his journey, from humiliation to healing, from victimhood to victory, and he realized something profound. Life isn't about avoiding battles. It's about fighting the right ones. One day, his daughter came home from school with an assignment. "We had to write about a hero," she said, handing him the paper shyly. Marcus unfolded it, his heart already pounding. The essay began. "My hero is my dad, not because he's a Navy SEAL, Not because he's strong, but because he never gave up even when people tried to hurt him. He showed me what it means to be brave, and I want to be just like him when I grow up. Marcus's eyes blurred with tears as he hugged her tightly. In that moment, all the pain, all the struggle, all the nights of doubt, it was all worth it. The neighborhood had changed. His family had healed. Justice had been served. And Marcus had found a new purpose, not just as a protector, but as a symbol of resilience. He understood now that his story wasn't just his own. It belonged to everyone who had ever been knocked down and dared to stand again. And as he stood on his porch, watching his daughter play in the yard, he whispered to himself,